So here's our 475 project folder. We are going to open this repository, and we're going to open it with Visual Studio Code. And as this launches, I've installed a Azure extension. And if we click on this, we can click Create New Web App. And you can enter a globally unique name. So we're just going to do ENSE 475, and we can do mini-API. And we're going to hit enter, and we are going to select node 12.9, unless you have dependencies or there might be deprecation. You just want to select your node version that you're using. And so it is going to create this mini API app. A couple others that we have up there are just like a JavaScript test and another test application. So this can show you what the files are. You can get logs, you can get deployment, you can get application settings, and it just provides you this all within Visual Studio Code. And if we look, and just in the bottom left here, we noticed created a new app, ENSE 475 mini API at https Azure mini API.net. And we can hit deploy on that. And that should deploy our app to the cloud. And so we can just say yes, and it is going to be deploying. And if we didn't see that pop up in like the bottom right hand corner there is this deploy to web app functionality that they've added as well. And it just provides you sort of a simple way to look at all of those. And if you look at this, the search extensions in Marketplace, what we're using is called Azure App Service and Azure Account. So you log into your Azure account, and then you're able to use Azure App Service to deploy to your Azure account and just get some sort of feedback and just some understanding of how the deployment works, where it's deploying, and your settings for deployment as well. You can look at this online, and you can deploy through online, although it's just generally easier to work with the to work with Visual Studio Code. Microsoft has provided some good integration for that, and it just sort of makes the application easier to use overall. And so down in the bottom right, it says check the output for Windows status. And so it's just looking for a Linux service here. And so it's found that Linux service, and it's just going to create some application insights. This just helps with debugging. And it's going to zip it, deploy it, and then it's going to build it. And then you'll see here it just completed the deployment, and it says deployment successful, deployed to this ENSE 475 mini API that we created. This is just a simple TypeScript API that we created for this project. And it does take a little while to build and deploy. It takes about 3-4 minutes, but it's not too bad overall. And so back in the pipelines, we can look at one of our others that we did here, and this is just this is the wrong pipeline. That's my bad. Sorry about that. Here we go. This is our other pipeline that's in the cloud and application. And it just allows you to build it and then deploy it straight to the web. So if we look at the YAML file for this, we can use a similar setup to this. And if we scroll down here, we can look at the stage deploy. So what you're looking at here is just some formatting of the YAML file, so you can separate it into different stages. You can have stage build, stage deploy, and I'm just going to copy all of this just because we have a couple of variables for our Azure subscription, our web app name, and our environment name, and just some setup that we want to carry over. There's a lot of documentation on Microsoft's Azure DevOps docs for this, and it just gives you a lot of insight onto how their like deployment works. And so we are going to undo that. We're going to take this task, which is just creating an archive file. So this sort of packages what we have and allows us to keep everything together. And we'll just fix this formatting quickly. And if you were to edit the YAML file in a text editor, it's super easy to do this formatting, but the UI that they provide for this is just pretty easy. And we are going to remove variables now that we've moved it up to the top, and we are going to update this. Our test name is ENSE mini-API, and it is, our environment is also mini-API. And if you had a different web app name than your environment name, then you just have to change these. It's just a coincidence, and well, easier for us to have this be the same. It's just a bit more descriptive. But if you were to decide to change that, then that would be totally fine. And we are going to separate these out into the stages that we had before. Invalid YAML structure. Tab. You know what? We can just take the code that we had before and we can take this out, and we can take the steps out. The steps and stages just sort of hold the same functionality, but the stages allow you to just get a better overview of that. And so we're just going to deploy it for Ubuntu, and we're going to deploy it to this ENSE 475 mini API. And this is just our Azure subscription connection. And when we deploy it to the environment, to the VM image, which is just our Linux Ubuntu image, and then we say what to deploy it as. And so we can save this and have it deploy, and it's just going to save those changes. And if we back out, it'll do a quick run, and our API should be live, and we are going to just try going to that. There might be a little bit of a problem with it trying to access it while it's deploying, but it's hard to say. And so this is our passing build, passing tests. We just updated the YAML file, and when you update the YAML file, it treats and commit it to the master branch. It just treats it as another trigger commit, and it's going to run your tests again. And you can just update your YAML file if you have any problems with that. And so it's just finishing up the job, and it's going to start our deploy stage. And so it's just waiting to get access to this so that it can take this. So it's downloading our artifact that we created in the build stage, which is just this pipeline artifact. And when you have the artifact, which is just your sort of file that it's going to use to publish, it'll deploy that as well. And it's just having a little bit of trouble actually getting to the API, but it is going to work, and it'll return calls when you send them to it. And so it'll just take roughly 3 minutes of time that we saw it take before to deploy this, and it'll show up in our main thing as 2 different stages. If you were to do this all at once, you might see just all feedback in one, but when you separate out the build and deploy stage, you just get sort of more insight into it, and it just allows that quicker interpretation of code. And you can see that we created an artifact. And if you weren't deploying or were deploying manually, then you can click on this artifact, and you can download this and upload it when you need it to. And so it's just using that zipped archive file, and it's going to deploy it to that ENSE 475 mini API environment and web application. And Azure Web App allows you to do APIs, web applications, and a couple of other hosting options as well. And then it's successfully deployed, and it's going to update it. And there we go. The job successfully finished. And yeah, as we went over in our previous presentation and can send up links to, it just deploys and uses the YAML file and uses tutorials right from Microsoft for all of those. And so we can look at these artifacts, and if you wanted to look at the artifacts just more in general, you can connect to a feed, and you can connect this to your pipeline, and you can also just go back to pipelines, and when you take this artifact, if you notice that it is like it is past all your tests for like sort of quality assurance, you're going to do your usability testing, user testing, efficiencies, everything like that. As long as it tests everything on your test server, you can use this artifact and manually deploy it to the production server, or even like a staging server for additional testing with the users.